very eloquently and visually sold both themselves and their topics so accurately. And I hope I don't need to encourage you to support
A woman
further.
in a satin gown walks into the state banquet at Buckingham Palace, and around her throat sits a string of oblong sapphires so dark they look almost black under the chandeliers. The room is full of world leaders. The cameras are already rolling. This is Queen Camilla, and she is wearing jewelry that once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, worn to Charles's first state banquet as monarch, again at the diplomatic reception in December 2022, and again at a state dinner at the Palace of Versailles in September 2023. Nobody hides this. Nobody has to. Now open a search engine and type in Camilla's daughter's name. A different story appears. Dozens of videos posted within weeks of each other, almost the same title every time. Princess Anne forces her to give back a hidden sapphire collection. Some say jade, some say a stolen painting, some say Balmoral, some say a courtroom, some say a confrontation at a gala. The details shift. The headline never does. So which version is true? The one photographed at a state dinner in front of 200 guests, with a date, a location, and a face everyone recognizes, or the one that shows up only in videos with dramatic music, a shocked thumbnail, and no named source at all? That's the question this actually answers. Not with more speculation, but with the real, documented history of Queen Elizabeth II's sapphires, the actual law that decides who owns a royal jewel after its owner dies, and the real reason palace silence gets mistaken for guilt. Hi viewers, quick question before we go further. Have you ever watched one of these royal scandal videos and caught yourself wondering, halfway through, whether any of it actually happened? Type yes or no in the comments. You are about to find out how close you were. Here is what nobody in those videos tells you. The sapphires Camilla wore at that banquet were a gift from her beloved father, King George VI, when Princess Elizabeth married Prince Philip in November 1947. They are real. They have a paper trail nearly 80 years long, and the woman those videos accuse of hiding them, Laura Lopes, has chosen to keep a very low profile and shows no desire to be part of the wider monarchical institution, and has spent 2 decades doing everything she can to stay out of exactly this kind of story. That contradiction is where this starts. Not with a confrontation nobody can place, name, or date, with a set of jewels that were photographed, worn, and documented for the better part of 80 years. And the deeper you look into who actually owns a queen's jewelry after she dies, the stranger the real answer gets. The necklace begins in 1850, in a workshop most people have never heard of, Carrington & Co., a London jeweler working during the reign of Queen Victoria. 18 sapphires, cut in a gradient from small to enormous, strung together with diamonds. Nobody alive today can say exactly where the stones themselves came from. What the records do show, clearly, is who wore them next. In November 1947, Princess Elizabeth marries Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Her wedding gifts, sent from family, heads of state, and well-wishers around the world, were displayed at St. James's Palace between November 1947 and March 1948, and were seen by over 200,000 visitors. Among them, from her father, King George VI, is that same sapphire suite, a necklace and a pair of matching earrings cut to echo it. Elizabeth doesn't leave the jewelry untouched. She had the necklace shortened in 1952, and in 1959 had the largest stone reset into a pendant. In 1963, she commissioned a matching tiara, built from a 19th century necklace that had once belonged to Princess Louise of Belgium, a woman disowned by her own father, and forced to sell almost everything she owned. The set that started as a gift becomes, piece by piece, something Elizabeth remade in her own image. She wears it for 70 years. To Canada in 1951, to a state banquet for China's President Xi in October 2015, and to a private party celebrating her Golden Jubilee in 2002. Jewelry experts have valued the necklace and earrings alone at roughly £5 million. It is one of the most photographed sapphire suites in the world, and one of the best documented pieces of jewelry any modern monarch has ever owned. And after her death in September 2022, it doesn't disappear into a vault. Camilla wears it publicly, to King Charles's first state banquet as monarch, and again the following year at Versailles. Anyone can find the photographs, so the sapphires aren't hidden. They never were. What's genuinely unclear, and this is the part almost nobody explains correctly, is what belonging to the Queen even meant, legally, while she was alive, because not everything a monarch wears is actually hers to give away. Some of it belongs to the crown itself. Some of it belonged, personally, to Elizabeth Windsor, the private individual. Those two categories are not the same thing, do not follow the same rules, and do not pass to the next generation the same way. That difference is where the real mystery begins. Start with the categories, because there are three, and almost every online rumor about royal jewelry works by quietly ignoring that fact. The first is the crown jewels, the ceremonial jewels worn at state occasions, including St. Edward's crown, the imperial state crown, the sovereign's scepter with cross, and the sovereign's orb, held in trust and passed from ruler to ruler, kept at the Tower of London. No individual king or queen can sell them, will them to a favorite grandchild, or take them home. The second is the royal collection, running to more than 1 million objects, a record of the personal tastes of kings and queens over the past 500 years, not owned personally by the monarch, but held in trust for his successors and the nation. The monarch holds these as a custodian, not a private owner, and cannot simply give them away. The third category is different from both. The Queen's private jewelry collection, more than 400 pieces, is stored in a secure vault roughly 40 feet below Buckingham Palace. Jewelry historians have been direct about this distinction. The jewels in the Queen's collection do not belong to the state, but are the personal property of Elizabeth II. They belong to her, the same way a wedding ring or a family photograph belongs to anyone else. Private property, under British law, gets willed to someone when its owner dies. And that's where this stops being simple. Once a will is submitted to court for probate, it becomes open to public inspection, unless a judge finds such inspection undesirable or inappropriate. But senior royals are the one category of citizen in the entire country exempt from that norm. The convention of sealing royal wills has existed since 1910, when Prince Francis of Teck, brother of Queen Mary, first sealed his, and it disappears into a locked safe kept by the president of the family division of the High Court. That convention was tested and confirmed. After Prince Philip died, the president of the family division ordered that his will be sealed for 90 years, revealing in the judgment that he is the custodian of a safe containing the wills of 30 deceased senior royals. So when people ask what happened to a queen's personal jewelry, the honest answer is, partly, we don't know. Not because anyone is hiding sapphires in a gala bathroom, because the actual legal document that would answer the question is, by law, none of the public's business for 90 years. That is the real silence in this story, and it's the silence a rumor always finds first. The will stays sealed. But the jewelry itself doesn't stay in a vault, it gets worn. And what gets worn in public is the closest thing the outside world has to a real paper trail. Weeks after the Queen's funeral, Kate wore the Queen's favorite pearls and silver Jubilee diamond and pearl earrings, and later wore a choker made of pearls gifted to the Queen by the Japanese government in the 1970s for the funeral itself. Over the following 2 years, more pieces surfaced on her, including the festoon necklace, commissioned by King George VI, and a maple leaf brooch first seen on her 2011 Commonwealth tour. Camilla, meanwhile, was seen in the Hesse Diamond Jubilee brooch, which she began wearing shortly after her 2005 wedding, and wore Queen Victoria's coronation necklace during Charles's coronation. Royal commentators have described an informal hierarchy at work. Author Katie Nicholl has said the Queen Consort gets first choice of the late Queen's jewelry, followed by the Princess of Wales. Magazine editor Ingrid Seward has said much of the plan was already sorted and organized by the Queen herself. One widely repeated figure claims Kate stands to inherit around $110 million in jewelry, but that number traces back only to an unnamed tabloid insider, never to a palace source, a court document, or anyone willing to put their name on it. None of the hierarchy itself is written law. It's tradition, observation, and photographs, nothing more, nothing less. Notice who is missing from that hierarchy entirely. Camilla's own children. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes will not automatically receive any royal titles, since Camilla's own titles are due to her marriage and do not pass to her children. There is no historical precedent for the stepchildren of a sovereign to be brought up through the ranks or take on official duties. Royal historians have been blunt about it. Laura, in particular, works as an art curator and has spent 2 decades staying largely out of the spotlight. She is Camilla's daughter. She is also, on every official document that matters, a private citizen, no more entitled to a place in that unwritten jewelry hierarchy than any other in-law standing at the edge of the family photograph, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the real hierarchy runs from Camilla to Kate, where exactly does the internet's version of this story, the one that puts a hidden Sapphire collection in Laura's hands, actually come from? Search a little further and the answer becomes obvious fast, because it isn't one video, it's dozens. Within the space of a few months, a wave of videos appeared online, many posted only days apart, sharing the same handful of ingredients rearranged like a template. Princess Anne cast as the enforcer, Laura Lopes cast as the accused, and a rotating cast of stolen object sapphires in one video, jade in another, a 300-year-old painting in a third, a trespassing accusation at Balmoral in a fourth. The plots contradict each other. The thumbnails don't. Not one of these videos names a source. Not one links to a court filing, a palace statement, or a single reputable news outlet. Buckingham Palace has issued no comment, because there is nothing on the record to comment on. Around the same time, a nearly identical, unverified claim circulated involving Princess Catherine and Laura Lopes at a formal banquet at Windsor Castle. Details limited. Palace silent, different accuser, different accusation, same missing evidence. This isn't really about Laura Lopes specifically. It's a pattern, and it works the same way every time. Take a real institution that famously doesn't explain itself, and as the last chapter showed, the palace legally cannot explain most of what happens to a late monarch's private property for 90 years. Insert a real, sympathetic, mostly private figure into that silence, someone the audience half recognizes but doesn't know well enough to defend. Attach her to an object people already find beautiful and slightly mysterious. Give the story a villain with a genuine reputation for toughness. Anne has spent decades characterized by a sharp tongue and a direct approach, once telling photographers to naff off, and has repeatedly been named the hardest-working royal, which makes her an easy face to cast as an enforcer, true or not. Repeated under a dozen titles, until repetition starts to feel like confirmation. Nobody has to prove anything. The silence does the work, and the algorithm does the rest. What's real is the sapphires, worn in public, photographed for 80 years. What's real is a legal system that seals a monarch's will for 90 years by law, not by scandal. What's real is that Camilla's own children were never part of the family's jewelry line at all. What's not real, so far, is any of it happening to Laura Lopes. And that gap, between what's documented and what's simply repeated, is exactly where the next part of this story picks up. The gavel comes down at Christie's in London, and the number on the screen behind it reads £900,000. That is what a single tiara, once worn by a princess on her wedding day, has just sold for to a bidder nobody in the room will ever meet. It is June 2006. Inside a packed South Kensington sale room, roughly 1,000 buyers watch in person, with another 500 bidding by telephone, as piece by piece, the personal jewelry of Princess Margaret, the late Queen's own sister, goes under the hammer. The Poltimore tiara, the one she wore at her own wedding in 1960. A Fabergé clock given to her by her grandmother, Queen Mary. A diamond necklace Queen Mary herself wore at her own coronation in 1937. Reports at the time even suggested that Queen Elizabeth II considered secretly bidding on a portrait of her sister just to keep it in the family. By the time the two-day sale ends, it has raised roughly £14 million, close to $19 million. This isn't a rumor. It happened, in public, with a catalog, a date, and a Christie's specialist who spent months writing the descriptions. And the reason it happened is almost embarrassingly ordinary. When Princess Margaret died in 2002, her estate was valued at roughly £7.6 million. Inheritance tax in the UK runs at 40%. Her two children, Viscount Linley and Lady Sarah Chatto, owed more than £3 million to the Treasury, and jewelry, unlike a house or a pension, is not something the government waits patiently for. So they sold it, publicly, legally, with their late father, the photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones, reportedly so hurt by the decision that he wrote to the auction house himself, asking his own children to stop. Years later, Viscount Linley told an interviewer, the reasons were mostly financial, because when people die, taxes need to be paid, whether you are royal or not. Here is what that story proves, and it is not a small thing. Royal jewelry does leave a family's hands, for real, well-documented reasons involving tax bills and probate, not secret confrontations in a gala hallway. Nobody needed Princess Anne to intervene. Nobody needed a hidden vault. They needed an accountant, which raises the obvious question about the George VI sapphires sitting on Camilla's neck right now. If Margaret's children had to sell to the highest bidder to satisfy a tax office, why has nobody ever demanded the same explanation for a set of jewels that moved quietly and without a single receipt made public from a dead queen to her son's second wife? The answer sits inside a single piece of paper most people have never heard of. And it was signed 13 years before Elizabeth II ever wore these particular sapphires to a state banquet for the President of China. On the 9th of September 2022, one day after his mother's death, King Charles III inherited a fortune that included private estates, personal investments, and a share of his mother's jewelry collection. He paid no inheritance tax on any of it, not £1. Compare that to Princess Margaret's children, forced to sell 900 pieces of their mother's belongings to cover a bill of more than £3 million. Same country, same tax authority, same 40% rate on estates above a certain threshold. Two completely different outcomes. The difference isn't a secret. It's a document called the Memorandum of Understanding on Royal Taxation, agreed between the Palace and Prime Minister John Major's government, and announced to the House of Commons on the 11th of February, 1993. Major told Parliament directly that inheritance tax would apply to gifts made by the sovereign, with one specific exception: transfers of assets from one sovereign to his or her successor. In plain language, whatever passes directly from a reigning monarch to the next one skips the tax bill entirely. Everyone else in the family, including a monarch's own sister, is not covered. That single clause explains almost everything chapters 1 through 6 have been building toward. Elizabeth II's jewelry, when it moved to Charles, moved under that sovereign-to-sovereign protection. When Charles's household then makes pieces available to Camilla, or when pieces are loaned to Kate, that is not the same kind of transfer at all, and royal finance experts have noted the rules covering gifts and loans between other family members are far less generous and far less examined by the public than the one clause everyone quotes. Major was direct in Parliament about why the exemption exists. In a hereditary monarchy, he argued, without it, the institution's assets would be sliced away by taxation across every generation. Whatever a person thinks of that argument, it is a real, recorded position, not a theory from an anonymous account. This is the real financial architecture behind every royal jewel that changes hands. Not a hidden vault, not a forced confrontation. A tax code, written into a government memorandum 33 years ago, that draws a hard line around exactly one relationship: sovereign to sovereign. And Camilla's children were never anywhere near that line. Whatever Laura Lopes might one day inherit from her own mother would follow the same ordinary rules that applied to Princess Margaret's children, not the exemption that protects a king. Which means if there were ever a real dispute over a piece of royal jewelry involving Camilla's family, the explanation would almost certainly be written in a tax return, not whispered in a corridor. That is a far less cinematic story than the internet wants to tell. It is also, as far as the public record shows, the only story that has actually happened. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small group holds up a sign with a number on it: £510 million. That is what the campaign group Republic says the monarchy actually costs the country every year once security, lost Crown estate revenue, and costs to local councils are added to the official figure. The palace disputes the framing. The number itself comes from a published report, not a video description. This is a real fight, playing out in real documents. The sovereign grant, the mechanism that funds the king's official duties, is tied by law to a percentage of the Crown estate's profits. Parliament's own researchers confirmed in a report published on the 30th of June 2026 that the grant is being reset from 2027 onward, down to just under £100 million a year, after years of higher payments meant to cover renovations at Buckingham Palace. Members of the House of Lords have openly questioned whether tying royal funding to a single estate's profits makes any sense at all, with one peer calling the entire arrangement a hostage to fortune. Republic goes further still, arguing that the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, treated for tax purposes as the sovereign's own property, are in fact state assets that should belong to the public outright. The group has also pushed to end the monarchy's long-standing exemption from the Freedom of Information Act, the same law that lets ordinary citizens request government records but stops at the palace gates. None of this is fringe internet chatter. It is published research, cited by journalists, debated in Parliament, and answered, however briefly, by the palace's own annual accounts. And beneath the sovereign grant sits a deeper, genuinely unanswered question. Nobody outside a small circle knows the true scale of the monarch's private wealth. The king derives private income from investments and inherited assets that is never made public. Critics, including members of Parliament, have described royal finances as shrouded in a level of secrecy no other public institution enjoys. That is the real transparency gap, not a missing Sapphire collection. A genuinely undisclosed personal fortune, protected by a tax exemption most of the country doesn't know exists, reviewed periodically by a small group of trustees rather than the public. William, Prince of Wales, will eventually inherit both the title and this exact set of open questions. As the future king, he will inherit the same sovereign-to-sovereign protections Charles received from Elizabeth, and the same criticism about what the public isn't allowed to see. That legitimate, well-documented gap is precisely what makes an invented one so easy to believe. When people already suspect the family hides its real financial picture, a video claiming it hides Sapphire's too doesn't sound like a stretch. It sounds like confirmation. But confirmation of what, exactly, is about to run into its final human obstacle? A woman who never asked to be part of any of this. Two small boys in ceremonial robes carry a 6-meter train up the aisle of Westminster Abbey. It's May 2023, the coronation of King Charles III, and the cameras are locked on every step. The boys are Gus and Louis Lopes, twins, 8 years old, serving as pages of honor. Their mother watches from a seat set back from the family pews. She is close enough to be part of the picture, and far enough that most viewers never learn her name. Laura Lopes was born in Swindon in January 1978. She studied history of art and marketing at Oxford Brookes, interned at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice, and by 2006 had co-founded 11, a fine art gallery in central London that still operates today. She married Harry Lopes, a former model turned chartered accountant that same year. Their eldest daughter Eliza served as a bridesmaid at William and Kate's wedding in 2011 at age 4. Whatever inheritance eventually comes to Laura herself, a manor in Devon and an estate in the Scottish Highlands, comes through her husband's family, not her mother's marriage to a king. A university expert on royal affairs described Laura and her brother Tom's approach plainly. They chose, deliberately, to keep living as private citizens, rarely appearing in public even during the 20 years their mother has now been married into the family. That wasn't an accident. It was, by every account available, a decision made and kept long before any of this attention arrived. Here is the part that rarely makes it into any video. A working royal has a communications office. When a false claim spreads about Kate or William, Kensington Palace can issue a statement within hours. Laura Lopes has no such office. No press secretary answers on her behalf. No palace account corrects the record when her name appears next to the words hidden, stolen, or forced. She built a life specifically designed to avoid this kind of attention, and the design itself, ironically, is what left her with no institutional shield when the attention arrived anyway. None of this means anything happened to her personally. As every earlier chapter has shown, nothing in the public record supports it. But the imbalance is real, and it says something uncomfortable about modern fame. You don't have to seek out a public role to end up cast in someone else's story, and you don't get a press office just because millions of people now recognize your name from a thumbnail you never agreed to appear in. What she actually has is quieter, and far better documented than anything in those videos. Picture the necklace one more time. 18 sapphires, cut in 1850, given by a king to his daughter in 1947, worn at a state banquet for a Chinese president in 2015, and worn again by a different woman, publicly, at Versailles in 2023. That is the entire, real, photographed life of the jewelry this story was built around. At no point does it disappear. At no point does anyone force anyone to give it back. Here is everything this investigation actually confirmed. The sapphires are real, and their history is public record. The royal collection, the crown jewels, and a monarch's personal jewelry are three separate legal categories, and confusing them is where most of these rumors begin. Senior royal wills are sealed for 90 years by a legal convention dating to 1910, which is the real silence people mistake for a cover-up. A 1993 tax agreement, not a secret deal, is the actual reason jewelry moves differently through different branches of this family. Princess Margaret's children really did sell her jewelry at auction, for real, published reasons, and Camilla's own children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, hold no royal titles, no place in the family's jewelry hierarchy, and no communications office to defend them when a claim goes viral. Here is everything this investigation did not find, anywhere, in any court filing, palace statement, or reputable news report. Any evidence that Laura Lopes possessed a hidden sapphire collection, any evidence that Princess Anne confronted her over it, and any evidence that Camilla was ever forced to choose between her daughter and the crown. The real story was never a scandal. It was a legal system built for secrecy around money, colliding with an internet built for stories about betrayal, and a private woman who happened to be standing in between. That's the difference between a mystery and a manufactured one. A real mystery has documents behind it, dates that check out, and named sources willing to be quoted. A manufactured one only has a title, a thumbnail, and a dozen copies of itself uploaded under slightly different names, each treated by the algorithm as confirmation of the last. The next time a video promises a secret vault, a forced confrontation, or a family betrayal involving people who cannot answer back, ask who the source is, what the actual public record shows, and who benefits if nobody checks. If this kind of forensic, sourced look at royal history is what you come here for, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Tell us in the comments which claim in this story surprised you the most, and share this with someone who's seen one of those videos and believed it.